This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter, batch churned from single origin cream.
We've got a culturing process, a fermenting process, an aging process. So the butter will taste very different than, I guess, the average supermarket butter. I like to say we make butter makers butter. Like, this is the sort of butter makers would like to eat, simply because of the slow process in which we ferment and age and get the flavour into it. You know, the natural fermentation that gets all the flavours into the cream, and then once you churn it, you end up with this really rich, flavoursome butter that evolves and changes because it's a live culture that's in the butter as well.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
Food is one of those things that's one of the rare things that's both a necessity and a joy, and it's a necessity and a creative outlet. So people have to eat, and so, you know, to be able to make it something more than just I have to eat, so I eat is pretty exciting, I think.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Many in the hospitality sector dream of having their own restaurant one day. Although a highly creative sector, do the challenges outweigh the benefits in an industry renowned for long hours and slim margins? Mike Jaques is the head chef and co-owner of Tulip Restaurant in Victoria. Mike, how are you?
Very well, thanks. How are you?
Good. It's great to get you on the show. You've got your own restaurant there that has a bit of a history in Victoria. How are things at the moment?
It's a bit of a tough time, obviously. I mean, it's hard to ignore the fact that the government and Reserve Bank are telling people to stop spending money. So yes. It's a tricky time, but we're persevering.
Tell us a little bit about the region that you're in and what you're doing.
Sure. So we're based in Geelong West, and we have a restaurant here which has been going on it'll be 10 years in October. I've been head chef here for 2.5 years, and with my business partner, we purchased the restaurant in July. So Tulip's definitely sort of one of those places that's everyone has known about for a long time in Geelong. We've got a lot of very long time regular guests, but we're kind of modernising, refining a little bit, things like that, just making our own stamp on the place. And I suppose it's kind of we benefit from having that long history, but also it can be difficult to get across the point that, you know, things are changing, and it is in many ways a new restaurant, a new business. And so, you know, we're bumping up against that thing where people kind of think, well, we've done Tulip because we went there 6 or 8 years ago. And so, yeah, it's kind of, that's one of our challenges at the moment is to sort of reinvigorate the restaurant's sort of reputation and make it interesting and relevant and sort of exciting for people again.
That's a fascinating challenge that you have. How different is Tulip compared to sort of back then before you did buy it? And what are the changes that you've made, you know, that really stand out? Yeah,
so it's an interesting one that I get asked a lot, because I sort of started making changes from when I was here. I came over in January 2020, and so I've kind of been making changes. So when we bought the restaurant and people would say, what are you going to change? We'd already done quite a lot of that, I think. So it's still, we've always had the idea that we want it to be recognisably the same restaurant. But just a bit of kind of modernising, I suppose. My experience in the UK, I've kind of wanted to slant a bit more towards fine dining. That's always had a great reputation for having great technique, amazing produce, but it's been a very much sort of a country style, big portions, big, you know, generous servings and things. So I think we kind of just wanted to make the value of it the experience rather than getting a huge meal, I suppose.
Tell us a little bit about that transition. You know, there's from head chef to owner. There's a lot of talk about the big transition from being a chef to a head chef. But what was it like for you going from head chef to owner and the challenges you faced?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think we had a really good idea of how to run the restaurant, but not so much of a great idea about how to run the business. So I think, I've been saying to people since we took over, it's that experience when you get your boss's job, and when you're in the job, you think, oh, this guy does nothing, I do everything for him, and I understand, I could do his job. And then you get it, and all of a sudden you think, oh, he was busy, and so it's been a lot of that, like we've it's kind of the same but more, and just so many things that you never thought about when you were an employee. Where does what day of the month does super come out and things like that. It's just something that, as an employee, not only do you not worry about it, but I think it just, you assume it kind of all happens automatically, which obviously nothing does.
I want to explore sort of what you're doing there and what it's been like for you since coming back during that COVID period and your life back in Australia. But take us back to when you were young. What sort of role did food play for you when you were growing up?
Yeah, I've always been a bit of an obsessive with food. So, I grew up on a farm in Woodend, so about 45 minutes north of Melbourne, beautiful area. And we had sheep on the farm, and so we always ate a lot of lamb, or more likely it was sort of two-tooth or a mutton. And I still, now when I'm serving lamb in the restaurant, I kind of am looking for that big flavour that I'm used to from my childhood. My dad is quite a good cook. He's not in the profession at all, but he just loves cooking, and I always remember sort of hanging around the kitchen while he was cooking, mostly lamb, and kind of that experience of him encouraged me, giving me things to taste, saying, what do you think it's missing? Or we had a little herb garden outside, and he'd send me off to the herb garden to pick things that I thought would go well with whatever he was cooking. And so that was great. That kind of, I think smell especially is such a great trigger for memory. And so that now when I'm picking rosemary or sage or whatever it is, I always think about, going out and having that image in my mind of the dish that we were trying to make and whether this herb or that herb would go with it. So yeah, that was kind of very much my interest in food from the beginning. But then I veered away from, I'm from a fairly academic family, so the expectation was that I would go off to university and things, which I did, and never really considered cooking as a career. But sort of when I did come back around to it, I had that like epiphany that this is what I should have been doing all along, really. Wow.
Tell us a bit about that period of time, when you did have that epiphany. You were sort of at uni, and how did that transition happen? So I went off to uni, like a lot of people who don't know what they want to do, and I did an arts degree. And I ended up dropping out. I lived on campus at Monash Uni, in a place that was quite famous for being a great place to party. And so I had an amazing time. I don't regret it for a moment. A lot of my really close friends now are from that time. But when I dropped out, it kind of it wasn't a surprise to me, really, because I just had no ambition, and an opportunity came along through a family friend to go over to Chile and work on an oyster farm, because he had an interest in the oyster farm, and they had the staff and everything, but no one that he knew and no one that he felt he could trust, really. So I happened to be doing nothing, and so it was a good fit for me, and I had a taste for adventure, I suppose, and went off and lived by myself in Chile for 6 months, working on an oyster farm. That's extraordinary. Do you have any sort of food stories and stories of what it was like on an oyster farm in Chile? Yeah, so it was great. It was an amazing experience. So we were on quite a large sort of inlet, and the water is really super cold because it's the Antarctic current coming up the coast of South America. And Chile is also really interesting in that they have a huge tidal rise and fall. So these inlets kind of get flushed with fresh, cold water twice a day. So the oysters grow really quickly and really beautifully. There's a huge aquaculture sort of industry in Chile especially. And the food was incredible. The guys that I was working with were all locals, and so they would show me,
little mollusks and all sorts of things that they would eat, fresh clams and mussels and things, just eating raw straight out of the water, because the water was so beautifully clean and everything was lovely and fresh. You could just eat it like that. Sea squirts that they call puri, and giant barnacles called picoroko and things, just amazing food that I'd never thought of, never considered as being edible, and honestly things that look like alien food, but they were amazing. And just like that kind of, because I was there with that sense of adventure, I suppose, the guys would say, here you go, eat this, and I'd just sort of have a go at it. But I suppose my best food memory is that we would have this farcical scene where everyone would turn up with a lunchbox for lunchtime, but the only thing in there was a couple of lemons and an oyster shucker, and we'd go out and sit on the pontoon and eat oysters for lunch almost every day. So,
what sort of impact did that experience have on you?
I think it was kind of that I kind of realised that this is what I wanted to be doing, is that food was what I wanted to do in my life. And, being exposed to things like that, and then living by myself, I had no contacts outside work there. So it was very much sort of go home and cook and experiment and go down to the market and buy ingredients that I hadn't used before and play around with them and things like that. And I just, it really sort of got me started on wanting to be in the industry.
Tell us about those sort of first steps into the industry. What was it like for you?
So I was already sort of mature age when I was already 24. So I decided that I'd do a full-time study at William Angliss. So rather than a traditional apprenticeship, I just went in to do a Certificate 3, and sort of almost towards the end of that year, I was out looking for jobs and sent my CV to the press club, and I was lucky that they picked me up. I think it was partially my experience on the oyster farm and things that had sort of separated my CV from others, I suppose. And they put me on, and I was there for a year and a half. And so it was a great place to sort of start my career, really, and it was quite an amazing place to experience as my first restaurant experience.
We had George Kambaris on Dirty Linen just recently sharing his story. Well, what was he like, and Joe like to work with?
Yeah, so George was like obviously very sort of inspiring for me as a young cook to see him around the place. He was always, a bit of a larger than life character. But my memory of it was that just he's quite sort of intuitive about food, I think. Sort of he would come in to the kitchen and say, right, I've got an idea, and he'd grab out some ingredients and things and start putting things together. And he just, as an observer, I suppose, and then I was quite new to the industry at that stage, it was very much like he just kind of had a feeling about what would work and what wouldn't work, and regardless of whether that was a conventional pairing or not, he thought that if he thought it was going to taste good together, we'd start plugging it together. Yeah, I remember vacuum packing watermelon with feta brine, which I just, at the time, I was like, how is this going to be tasty? But it was delicious, So, and then Joe Grabak, obviously, is an amazing guy, just a more of that French classical technique and the London experience, I suppose, with Ramsay and those guys. That he was a great organizer of the kitchen, incredibly talented. The detail orientation with Joe was the real sort of his strength, I suppose. He had a terrific palate and was very, very focused on the details of a dish. So I think that was the kind of almost a bit of a yin and yang of George and Joe, which worked really well.
You spent a fair bit of time with Philippe Michel as well. What sort of influence did he have on you? Philippe's been incredible for me throughout my career. So I worked with him for nearly 2 years, and again, just the absolute consummate professional. The depth of knowledge that Philippe has kind of inspired me to really research into things and know the history of dishes and uses of ingredients and things like that, which has always been interesting to me, I think. And Philippe, just the sort of his experience in the industry is something that you can't fake, you can't buy, you can't
get it any other way than living it. And I think there's been quite a few times in my career where I've reached out to Philippe and he's given me some really amazing advice, especially when I left Philippe's to go to England. So my wife, my girlfriend at the time, her visa was running out and we decided that we'd go over to London. And so I kind of reached out to, I asked Chef Philippe if he had any advice to me, and he kind of broke down the opportunities that I would find and the sort of paths that those opportunities might put me on for my life. And it was just amazing. He kind of said, if you want to achieve this, then maybe look at a 3-star. And if you want to achieve this, go to a 2-star. And, all the way down to if you want to have a happy family and a life where you spend time with your family, just go and work in a nice, casual, relaxed restaurant kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, he just has that sort of, I feel like he's seen it all and done it all twice and can step back from it a little bit and see the industry and the life of a chef as a whole, I suppose.
You spent a large portion of your career in the UK. What were the really important sort of venues and people that you worked with in your time there?
Yeah, I mean, I went over to London like so many Aussie chefs and thought, right, now it's time to see what the hard life of a chef is all about. And so I went over there with the expectation that I was going to get shouted at and all this sort of stuff. And so I suppose that kind of informed my choice when I was looking for somewhere to go. And I started at the Ledbury, which is famously like that. And they put me on to a guy who was at the time the youngest Michelin star chef in London. His name's Andy McFadden. And I worked with him in a small French restaurant which had 1 Michelin star. And I mean, yeah, if I was looking for hard, I got it. I mean, we were doing between 30 and 50 for lunch and 60 for dinner every night with just 3 of us in the kitchen. And just, yeah, really kind of that military discipline, but also, a real kind of wild card, eccentric chef who worked incredibly hard. I've never seen anyone plate dishes faster than him. But and he was like, he would stand at the pass and we would just put trays of food, on either side of him, and he'd just have both hands going at all times, sort of plating 4 dishes at a time as we were putting up the mise en place to him. It was just incredible stuff, but a really draining kind of life. They ended up giving me the key to the restaurant because I was sort of there half asleep on the doorstep of the restaurant at 7 o'clock every morning in the dark and in the snow or whatever. And so, yeah, they ended up letting me have the key so I could let myself in rather than waiting outside. So that was my experience of when it gets really tough, and that burnt me out pretty quickly. So I went off and worked in a really fantastic gastropub for an Australian chef called Trish Hilferty, who was really she was at the start of the gastropub revival in London with a restaurant called The Eagle. And her place, the Canton Arms, was amazing. That was kind of the flip side of the coin, and really the other avenue that Philippe had kind of described for me, where I did something which was still great cooking, still learning a lot, but back to basics, whole animal butchery and big braisers and, cooking a roast beef for 200 guests on a Sunday, and sort of just a totally different experience to what I had had before. But a better work-life balance as well. And my personal life really kind of developed in the year and a half that I worked there. So that was kind of one of those things that I thought it was a fantastic experience, but in the end, not really my style, what I was hoping for in my career. So I went off and worked at a restaurant called Ferra, which was part of Claridge's Hotel, for Simon Rogan, who's an incredible guy. He's had a lot of influence on my style of food, I suppose, and my ideas about food, just from his ethos and his kind of experience as well.
What did you take from your time with Simon Rogan?
So I think the major thing for me, which is really the way that I work now, is that so he had his own farm, and he said that he had this kind of epiphany where he was standing in the field in his farm with a big sort of armful of beetroots and thinking, what am I going to do with these beetroots? Rather than what will I serve with the steak in the main course, or what goes with fish? He was starting with the vegetables. And I think if you want to work seasonally, that's kind of the only way to do it. You can serve chicken or beef or whatever any time of year, but you only have these great beetroots for a short amount of time. And so even now, when I'm thinking of a main course dish or whatever it is, a protein dish, my thought process starts from the vegetables. And also he really highlighted the difference that you get from having a connection with where the food comes from.
What was the produce like in the UK?
That was amazing. So you had the sort of the nice balance of these small farms like Simon's Farm and things, which I was really, really lucky to work with. You know, we would get a weekly delivery where there'd be trays of live micro herbs and things which we would have in the kitchen and pick things and put them directly on the plate. We would have, beautiful heirloom varieties of all our vegetables, small production and things, meaning that there's, more intense flavour, even though they might look a bit wonky or whatever it is. And then you pair that with all the incredibly beautiful, refined produce coming over from France. You get a tray of endive, like Whitloff, which just, you open it up and it looks like a chocolate box. It's just all beautifully kind of arranged perfectly. Each one is exactly the same. Each one is beautifully perfect, wrapped up in tissue paper and things. It was just those two kind of extremes, I think are really what makes the produce in the UK exciting and really interesting to work with.
Farah ended up closing while you were there, and you were part of a team to open up a new restaurant in the same site. Tell us about that period of time and the impact it had on you.
Yeah, so it was really, it was a very sad thing when Farah ended. We were a very close-knit team, a lot of like-minded people who had given a lot to the restaurant, and it was, the decision to close was basically because of a sort of difference of opinion between Simon and Claridge's about the direction of the restaurant. And so, yeah, it was quite a difficult thing where, a lot of people left straight away, and those who were left to sort of man the station. I mean, I think part of the reason I was selected to help open the new restaurant is when the 11 Madison Park team came over, I was talking to them, and the chef, Dimitri, who ended up being who's now the culinary director of Claridge's, he sort of said to me, well, I can't work out what your job is here. And I said, well, I make the bread in the morning, I do the pastry section for lunchtime, then I make the bread for tomorrow, and then I do the meat section for dinner. And he was like, okay, no problem. We'll, I think we can work with that. So yeah, I was one of a few of us who got selected from Farah to open Davies and Brook, which was just an incredible experience, probably one of the most difficult times in my life, because there was some delays in opening the restaurant. And so when the original date, we would have opened while my wife was on maternity leave, and we could have had a lot more sort of flexibility. And then by the time we did actually get around to opening, my wife was back at work, and so we had a 1-year-old. And I was working, I think we did, for the opening weekend, I think we did 15 days in a row of 7:30 in the morning until 1 o'clock in the morning. And so it was kind of just, you learn quite a bit about yourself doing stuff like that. I know that after day 10, my eye starts to twitch and things like that, which is kind of things that quite a few people don't ever have to learn about themselves, I suppose.
You came back to Australia in a very interesting period of time for all of us on the planet. Tell us about the decision to come home and what it was like trying to get back.
Yeah, so I mean, my plan was always to come home. We sort of thought that it would be a good fit to go to come back when my oldest son was going to start primary school, and so unfortunately for us, if we wanted to do a bit of travelling of things, that meant that September 2020 was the perfect time for us to leave the UK, and it just also happened to coincide with sort of the peak of the pandemic there, and the start really of the serious lockdowns and the border closures and things over here. So I was speaking with Graham and Matt from Tulip, and I actually accepted a job with them around that time, August, September 2020, and moved out of our flat, shipped everything to Australia, and then had the first of our flights cancelled, which ended up happening to us 7 times. And we moved into an Airbnb for an undetermined period, and we were there for sort of 3.5 months. Just living in an Airbnb, working in jobs that I'd already resigned from, and I was very lucky that they understood that they were happy for me to just continue on until I had to leave, which was very lucky. But yeah, I mean, it was really difficult, that uncertainty of book a flight and then plan to leave and then have that flight cancelled. I mean, I think my son said goodbye to his school class in the UK 3 times. Said, I'm leaving on the weekend, and then he'd turn up again on Monday. But yeah, I mean, we were determined that we wanted to do it. We know that, we knew that trading in a 2-bedroom flat in London for a house in Ocean Grove was going to be a big change, and for the positive, for the better for our kids. So we were determined, and we ended up getting in. We landed on the first day of hotel quarantine the second time around. So I think it was the 8th of December, something like that, or the 9th in 2020. And so, 2 weeks in the hotel airport with a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, which was, I'm very lucky that my wife is an exceptional organizer, and she had, a schedule of a new toy each day and a new game to play each day and things for the kids. And actually on the day that we got out and we were collected by my parents, my oldest son said that he'd had a really fun time. So that was good.
Was it hard for you to adjust to working in a kitchen in Australia when you started in Tulip compared to what you sort of were used to in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I had worked in very big teams, and Tulip's a very small team, a very different kind of kitchen as well. So, the Davies and Brook kitchen, I think they spent something like £5 million on the kitchen itself. And so to go from there with a team of 35, 40 chefs, and then I arrived at Tulip and there were 3 of us, was a big change. And I think at that time as well, it was a crazy time where we were open for a few weeks, and then we went into lockdown, and then we'd come back out, and we'd be doing takeaway. It was just, you had to be so versatile as well, which was something that I hadn't sort of hadn't worked with before, because in London, Claridge's didn't want to do takeaway during lockdown because it wasn't a good fit for their brand. So we were just off. And so when I came over here, and it was kind of, we'd get a few hours notice for a lockdown, it would be like, okay, takeaway tonight. So yeah, it was an amazing, interesting time to come in, and touch wood, we're past that now, and we move on with a bit more sort of certainty. But it's it definitely taught me to think on my feet a lot more, and to try and just be adaptable and change the things I can change, and don't change the things I can't, because you get upset about the fact that we were going into lockdown, but it's really nothing you can do about it. The only thing you can change is your reaction to the news rather than changing the news.
Was it an easy decision for you, having been head chef of the venue, to become an owner and take on the business?
Yes and no. I think, it has always been a dream of mine to own a restaurant. And I think getting into a restaurant that was, first of all, already a going concern, and also something that I knew so well, and even more so my business partner, Dan's been the restaurant manager here for 5 years already. So the fact that we already knew really well what we were getting into and how it operates and what works and what doesn't, I think that was a really kind of a great way to take the first step into owning a restaurant where, it's not all from scratch. We had a bit of a leg up, and Graham Jeffries, had been a great mentor to me about, giving me the sort of the knowledge of the restaurant and giving me his insights of, what he had learned from running Tulip for 8 years or whatever it was that he did. So, I think we were lucky in that we certainly would have found it more difficult to set up a restaurant from scratch. And so that was kind of something that really tipped the balance in the idea of saying, okay, let's dive in and have a go at it.
You mentioned a bit earlier that you kind of wanted to take the restaurant in a little bit more of a fine dining direction. Tell us a little bit about the menu structure and maybe a dish or two that sort of exemplifies what you're doing.
Sure. So for me, it's kind of, I would say my 3 years or 2.5 years at Tulip so far have been in really 3 distinct blocks. So the first year was to get my food up and running. And so my style of food, based on that kind of experience that I had with Simon Rogan, is a lot of making our own base ingredients, so a lot of vinegars and ferments and things like that, which then get used in subtle ways through dishes. So I think the way that I explain that is that everyone makes pickles, but if I make the vinegar, then no one's pickles taste like mine. So we do a lot of that kind of stuff, and so that takes time. So I think the first year was really getting my food how I wanted it, and then the second year we really focused almost exclusively on the guest experience. And at the end of that second year, we decided that the way forward for us was to only offer a chef selection menu. So we offer 2 or 4 courses, 6 dishes in the 2-course and 9 in the 4-course, sharing food. And it's just kind of what's good seasonally, again, going back to that kind of starting all my ideas with the vegetables and things, and just focusing on the actual whole experience. So not just this is a good dish and this is a good dish, but how do the 2 dishes fit in the context of a menu? And so I suppose a big part of it is quite a small thing, but I go out to every table at the start and introduce myself just after they've sat down. And I'll pour a little drink by way of amuse-bouche to kind of just give people an idea of how we work, what they might expect, even though there's no printed menu in front of them. They just trust us as to there are either 6 or 9 dishes coming, and give them a bit of comfort that although they might not know what it is, they can expect it to be good. And so at the moment, we're in autumn, we're doing a mushroom broth, which is this beautiful, really rich, the sort of cooking juice that comes from the mushrooms, just seasoned up, and it just really sort of rich, earthy, umami kind of flavour, with a celery leaf oil on top. So people get straight away, it's a little bit comforting. It's kind of a really sort of interesting thing that's delicious and warm and makes you feel settled. And then it's also something that's kind of a bit left of field for a lot of restaurants. So people won't have tried something like that before necessarily, and so they kind of build the trust straight away as soon as they sit down. And introducing myself as well, I kind of have this corny line that I say where if it's a chef selection, people quite like to know who's doing the selecting. So I'll come out, talk to them about, likes and dislikes, allergies, aversions, etc., and then we sort of tailor a menu so that everyone gets something that's appropriate and delicious. So
Does that connection with the guests have an impact on you and the way you approach your cooking as well?
Absolutely. I mean, it helps me a lot with when I'm trying to work out what people will enjoy. You know, like we have a range of dishes. In the past, we've had, you know, ox heart or raw kangaroo or something like that, and talking to people, you know, sometimes I think, okay, they're going to get it, or maybe that's not for them, you know. So that really helps in trying to make sure that everyone gets an experience that they're going to enjoy based on, you know, my read of the guest, I suppose. But yeah, also, you know, it's a lot about, you know, I'll come up with dishes and I think, okay, how will I explain this at the table, or what's fun about this? What's going to draw people into the experience a bit more? There's a dish the only dish that we've done each year in the season is a corn dish that I came up with, where one of the elements is what we call our corn hollandaise. So we juice sweet corn raw and then cook out the juice, and the natural cornstarch and the juice thickens it, and then we whip it with melted butter to make like a corn hollandaise. And people love it, but if I don't deliver the dish, the question is almost always, what is that sauce? And so that's kind of the thing where I like to go out and introduce the dish, so give them just enough information that they can get something out of the experience. I've often found with, you know, beer or wine or whatever it is, the more you know, the more you taste. And so without being too chefy and over the top and flooding people with information, it's nice to give them enough information that they can understand the work that's gone into it.
A bit earlier on, you mentioned the importance of vegetables, particularly with seasonality. Do you have any sort of connections that you've made with local producers that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I'm really, really lucky with that. So just absolute kismet. Something that fell into my lap was that the apprentice at Tulip, when I took over as head chef, is the nephew of an incredible farmer whose name's Kim Turner, and she's not just a farmer, but she's a disability support worker. So there's a place just outside Geelong which is called the Paddock, and they operate as an experience for people with disabilities, Down syndrome, kind of intellectual disabilities, to go out to a working farm and grow vegetables and plant things and harvest things, and so their primary function is the support work, but they also just have this incredible group of farmers who do everything organically, biodynamically, small crops. They grow things because they love them, because they're tasty, because they're fun to grow and that sort of thing. And so she just turned up on the doorstep with a big tray of things that they were growing, and sort of said, would you be interested in using this stuff? And so we've had an amazing relationship with them throughout my time, and I can also tell you that it's definitely the bill that gets paid first, because it makes us feel great to pay it when it's going to a charity who do amazing work. So they're incredible, and also more recently we've teamed up with a group called Farm My School. Similar kind of idea where these guys have taken on a disused sports oval in Drysdale as part of the Bellarine Secondary College and turned it into a farm. And so their first sort of idea is to feed the school community. So the school canteen uses the produce. They sell veg boxes to the school community, and then they also sell to some restaurants. So we're very lucky that they've sort of agreed to work with us. So again, just beautiful organic produce that the school students get involved in the harvesting and get involved in growing and things, and learn about seasonality and fresh produce and things like that. So they're another fantastic one to use, and using farms like that is what really drives the seasonal aspect of Tulip, because, you know, when they say to me, this is the last week for tomatoes, that's the last week for tomatoes. You know, there's no, oh yeah, but we can get them from Queensland, or we can get them from Paraguay or whatever. We just say, okay, that's it. You know, if they're done, then we're done. So
in your first year, you earned a chef's hat as owner of Tulip. How did that feel?
It's great. It's kind of the restaurant has had a hat throughout its time. Obviously, there were no hats awarded during the pandemic, so it was a bit nerve-wracking, to be honest, to take over a hatted restaurant. And we believed that what we were doing was, as good or better than it had been in the past, and so it felt right that we retain the hat. But there's no, with that kind of publication, there's no guarantee. It's kind of starting a new chef basically starts a new proposition for a restaurant. So we were, it was great. It's a fantastic feeling to be vindicated a bit in what we're doing, because we do, work in a way that's different to a lot of places. It's on our little strip in Geelong West or in the centre of town and things, you can see that, a steak and a parma will fill tables, but that, we have a sort of a vision of what we want Tulip to be, and getting the chef's hat really kind of makes us feel as if we're on the right path.
Well, you're doing amazing things there at Tulip. What do you love about what you do?
What I love about working in a restaurant is that I think it's kind of, food is one of those things that's one of the rare things that's both a necessity and a joy, and it's a necessity and a creative outlet. So people have to eat, and so to be able to make it something more than just I have to eat, so I eat is pretty exciting, I think. And so I love talking to people about what I've done. I like presenting a dish to someone and getting a response. I think it's a real immediate. If you think about it as a creative pursuit, it's one where you get kind of the most immediate response from your audience. And I really love that, to see people, people come up to the pass and say thank you and tell us that they've had a great experience. I think that's kind of what makes it worthwhile for me, yeah.
Well, it's amazing what you're doing there, Mike, and a real honour to have you on Deep in the Weeds today to hear just a part of your story. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Will do. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Cheers.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.